I'm now starting off this video on the YouTube platform where I'm talking with Hector Roos, who is the Libertarian candidate for governor of Florida. Elections November 8th or before.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about some technology topics. We also have a video up on the Locals platform, warrenredlich.locals.com, also known as the Daily Lie, where we talked about some political issues. The Daily Lie, it's making fun of the media more than anything else. So Hector is running for governor, and he's a libertarian. And I mentioned this in the other video. I was the libertarian candidate for governor of New York, and my YouTube channel is mainly about technology, particularly Tesla, SpaceX, Boring Company, Neuralink, electric vehicles, solar, battery, grid storage, battery backups. You know, revolutionary change in certain industries and what that means for America and Florida and so on. So I wanted to ask you, because we were just talking on the other platform, we were talking about energy. You brought up energy as an issue, the price of energy. Florida, it seems to me, has a reasonably positive set of laws favoring solar, but maybe I'm wrong about that. What are your thoughts about how Florida handles solar on, let's say, residential or commercial installations? How the Florida government handles it, how you would handle it differently?
Floridians passed a constitutional referendum guaranteeing access to residential solar, right? So this idea that people can have solar, they have to buy it completely up front. They can't lease it from and what the difference between the application here in Florida, as I said, to like New York or somewhere in the New England area, is that the housing developers up there can essentially make arrangements with the providers for the technology to go ahead and install them on all their homes at new construction, right? So right from the beginning, they're designed to have the solar installations, to have the batteries, to have the regulators, and be able to have this, have the generation in place. They do that on the basis of leasing the equipment. So leasing the equipment is actually banned in the state of Florida. You're not allowed to have this kind of relationship with home builders either to sell a greener product, for lack of a better word. Now, it's one thing to, that it's not feasible economically. It's another thing to outright ban it. And that's the type of thing. In commercial spaces, this is especially true. What the landowner cannot create a panel farm basically on their roofs and sell and distribute or sell the electricity to their tenants. That is also not allowed under Florida law. So these are the biggest in terms of impact, in terms of electricity generation that goes to these in terms of scale, right? That is something. This distributed power and certainly renewable power is something that the power corporations or electricity generating corporations like FPNL or Duke Power, wherever you are in the state, they don't want. In fact, they basically made a huge bets in natural gas, which now with the issues in Russia, with inflation, and then of course the Biden administration turning around and disfavoring them regulatory wise in terms of providing what used to be cheap gas, right? Is now turned the other way around. Now it's expensive. Now it's costly, and they pass those expenses directly to the consumers. And that's one of the biggest drivers of it, was because of the type of electricity source they were using, the power source, the fuel source. Rather than the sun, they were using natural gas. It went up, and that's where we're at. So
would you like to see Florida law become more favorable to solar? And how would it be under, if supposing you won the election, what would you push for?
Solar would be great. Solar should we continue I would put pressure on the legislature to put a question in the referendum, because they're not going to do it themselves, right? To pass a law to do that, put the question to the voters and let them approve it. That'll be number one. The other way I would do it is
to approve what?
A statewide referendum.
That's a referendum that says what?
That makes it a distinct right that the government cannot, in other words, regulate these leases, and basically there's no interference in the industry itself from a regulatory standpoint that matter, besides like safety and efficacy, right? If that's going to be the standard, that's going to be a very minor standard.
Okay.
But frankly, by the way, frankly, the whole industry needs to be retooled in terms of it is regulated, because there's no one set standard. Every county actually has a different set of standards, and you're going to find this a little funny. Not necessarily not because there's a patchwork, but the patchwork is because you have building departments who don't even know what the electricity hookups look like on plans, on mechanical plans for solar hookups or electricity, plans. So there is some obvious changes that have to be that actually have to be standardized
Okay.
in that on that sense.
So one of the topics that my audience on YouTube is most interested in is electric vehicles, and particularly Tesla. And I should disclose, by the way, the house I'm sitting in right now, which I'm renting for a couple months, has Tesla solar panels and has Tesla power walls and has a Tesla charger for my Tesla. And I have a Tesla that's a self-driving car. It's got what's called FSD beta. Florida has, and Governor DeSantis signed into law what I would describe as very favorable laws for self-driving cars. So let's dive into the self-driving car part first. My car will drive me from home to the gym pretty much without me having to intervene. I watch it, I make sure if I think it's doing something wrong, I correct it. But by and large, it's able to drive me from home to the gym and back with zero interventions. Do you how are you familiar with the Florida laws about self-driving cars? There's some law that was, I think, was signed in 2019. Are you familiar with that law? What do you think of it? What do you think Florida could do or should do regarding self-driving cars and a future of robo-taxis where the cars drive themselves and replace Uber and Lyft?
It's first, I will tell you that the laws look a little bit the same in different states that allow self-driving cars in the first place. But why don't we see more of that? And really, it's money. It's money from the federal government that really is prohibiting this at this point. We you know that once you when you have a self-driving car that's basically drives itself, the end result is taking more motorists off the road, because the trips are the trips, you can actually carpool more effectively. You have you have what you have is basically these self-driving systems, which are basically what they call now is that the personal the personal PV, I think it's PVP, personal well
Personally vehicular program. I mean, look,
something to that.
The simple reality is that a self-driving robo-taxi dramatically lowers the cost of transportation because you're not paying for a driver, and if it's an electric vehicle, you're paying less per mile for the amortization and energy use of the vehicle. So my audience is very familiar with what we think is coming, which is a robo-taxi network, probably dominated by Tesla, where currently you pay like $2.50 to $3 a mile to ride in an Uber. And in the long run, it's going to be 25 cents a mile to ride in a robo-taxi, which will be cheaper than owning your own car. So we head towards a world where people don't own their own cars anymore. I've asked like local legislators in Florida this stuff and previous videos that all of a sudden we don't need a DMV anymore because nobody's getting a driver's license and nobody's registering a car. We don't need local DMVs. The robo-taxis can be registered at a statewide level. And then you wouldn't need police pulling people over because the cars aren't committing traffic violations anymore. So
I'll point out do you know what Tesla's doing? Well, not Tesla, but Elon Musk's conglomerate of companies is doing right now. Like in Vegas.
I know almost everything Elon Musk's companies are doing. That's my
so
channel's about. This is an Elon Musk quote T-shirt. So
yeah. So what you know about then what the Boring Company did in Vegas and what their program?
I wrote in the system.
Right.
I've been in it.
So you know that South Florida has, well, I was going to say 3 such programs, but there's 2 actually that have legs in South Florida. One is the Fort Lauderdale. There's a Fort Lauderdale loop.
Los Olas loop.
The Los Olas loop, and the second one is the North Miami Beach loop. Right, it goes that has 2 arms that are designed for it. It's the lesser known of them because it slipped in while Fort Lauderdale was trying to get its.
It's the Golden Glades interchange to the beach.
To the beach, right? Yeah. Right. So it's 163rd Street, right? So those are basically the companies are the Boring Company is taking this to proof of concept. They got Vegas. Now they're replicating it in different, basically terrain, right? Because what people are saying is, oh, you can't build it there, right? But the Boring Company has been able to basically bring that, not only do so, but, and by the way, obviously the water table in Vegas, I'm sure you've talked about it, is
Wait.
basically even lower.
Let me just pause you for there for a second.
Sure.
You've been to the port of Miami.
Yes.
How did you
They
get
have a
there?
tunnel. They
Okay,
have a tunnel.
there's a tunnel in Fort Lauderdale. There's a train tunnel in
Yes,
Fort
there
Lauderdale.
is.
And I interviewed on my YouTube channel. I interviewed a Florida geologist, David. I forget his last name. David. Well, I forget his last name. Sorry, but I interviewed a Florida geologist about boring tunnels in Florida. It's not a problem. The water table is
Yeah,
not an issue. The geology of Florida is not an issue. You can tunnel in Florida.
exactly. So what you're seeing is that they're rapidly taking over, taking advantage of both public funding and the opportunity where you just have urban, but the America, whatever, Build Back Better money has money for boring tunnels in it, by the way, explicitly.
I did
So
not know
in
that.
case you did, yeah, they do. It's I mean, it's a $2 trillion package. They put everything and the kitchen sink in there. So the reality is that is this is they want to make sure that it's very clear that this is something a reliable technology. Obviously, it's set in its in 90% of a fixed guide path, right? In terms of if it's in the tunnel, right? It's for the most part, it's going to be in the tunnels. There will be some outside of the tunnels, but it's self-driving, of course,
Yeah.
for both
Well,
in Los Angeles.
currently, just be clear, currently the Las Vegas tunnel system is not self-driving. The expectation is sometime in the next couple of years they will go to self-driving.
They can go self-driving now if they wanted to. Just remember that. But
Trust me, I drive a self-driving Tesla. It's not there yet. It's getting there. It's not there yet.
yeah, the idea here though is I mean ultimately they're when they get the tunnels done, they're expected to make that fully automated.
Yeah.
That there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. I
Yeah.
mean, right now, if you go over to North Miami Beach, they have these they have driven cars like with a driver that's driving. They're driving Teslas around. People running Teslas as their their local mode of transit, their last mile, or their local circulatory. I mean, I haven't seen anybody else in Florida do that, for Teslas at least. But they're certainly doing that. And the idea in transportation has always been, you follow the scope of the system follows the demand, right? It's very unique, especially when we already have all these built out urban areas. We're not like New York in the 1920s when you could build out the train to go out in the middle of farmland, and then you will build, you build it, they will come, with that kind of induced demand. But the idea here is what the projects that are being made available now mean that we're not that far off. Maybe 5 years. I think we'll really see this in terms of the technology getting there, and proving itself in terms of how to relieve or move people. Not even relieve traffic at this point. How to just move people. Period.
What,
Because ultimately
what
that's
about
the goal,
what
right?
happened to the Brickell Bridge? I thought there was going to be a tunnel replacing the Brickell Bridge.
They did not have the political will to do that. I'll put it to you that.
Oh, the politics in Miami stopped it.
Right.
Okay. That
Well,
was
you
a
have
good
to
idea
understand,
though.
that idea has been in place since the 70s. They wanted to put a vehicular tunnel there, and they did prove they could do it with the Port of Miami one. But there's also a port of the Miami River, and they're very influential, and they do a lot of tonnage too, and that would preclude them from doing business on the river as a trade hub. So that's yeah, it's there's politics and business involved there.
Okay.
It's yeah,
So
but
what are
yeah,
your thoughts
Miami's
about
idea is dead basically.
what are your thoughts about my expectation is boring companies filed they just had a funding round, and as part of the funding round they did a press release, and they're expecting to start and manufacturing. I'm like so nuts about this stuff. You're not aware how much I'm into this. I've been to the
Right.
boring company manufacturing test site, which is becoming a manufacturing site, multiple times. This is in Austin, Texas, or
Yeah.
Bastrop, Texas, outside of Austin. They are building a manufacturing facility to start manufacturing boring machines, and their plan is to basically start producing 12 boring machines a year. and have those boring machines go out, and each boring machine does 50 miles of tunnel a year, which means 600 miles of tunnel a year. So I think we're probably about a year away from all of a sudden a lot of tunnels appearing in a lot of places. What is your thought about the role of the state government that you're running for in these tunnel systems appearing in Florida?
Well, okay, but one thing I want to say, because I'm excited about boring itself, is that they're promising these two loops in South Florida that they can finance it all themselves
Yes.
if they wanted to.
Well,
Now,
there's a
now the
business
state
model there. Let's talk about that. There's a business model there that I am hoping that boring company is able to do, and that local governments will go along with it, which is where the boring company pays to build the tunnel system. The boring company owns the tunnel system, operates the tunnel system, and although libertarians won't like this part of it, they give the local government a cut, right? So they charge whatever
profit
they
share.
charge for the rides, and ultimately the local governments get a cut of the action. So if you're a politician, it's like, wait a minute, you're solving my traffic problem and I don't have to spend any money, and in the end I get money, right? So that's a win for the government, and the boring company ends up owning this insanely profitable tunnel system for eternity, making crazy revenue long term with minimal expenses, because once you build a tunnel, the maintenance of the tunnel is easy. And unlike other things that Elon does, it's not rocket science, it's not artificial intelligence, and it's not brain surgery, right? You know, three of the things that Elon does are some of the hardest things in the world. Tunnels, we know tunnels work. We've had tunnels for over 100 years. We know tunnels work. So this is a no-brainer. But that potential for the win-win of, hey, Mr. Local Government, you don't have to spend anything, and we'll solve your traffic problem, and plus we're going to give you money at the end. Even though as a libertarian we don't like the part about giving the government money, does it seem like a pretty good system, pretty good approach?
I think that makes sense. I think it's reasonable. I think if you look back to the history of cities and towns, they started off as a basically market towns that they controlled toll bridges to have access to for people to have access to the access to that market. So it's really a historic function of cities to offer these be these nucleuses for commerce and for transportation. So it makes sense that everything else the government does these days be expanded. It really has no place except in science fiction.
Yeah, but if you think about it, one of the biggest criticisms of libertarians is, but without governments, who would build the roads? And now we have an answer: Elon Musk.
Right. Well, yeah, and of course, that governments never build the roads; they outsource
Of
that
course
to
not.
contractors to do it.
Of course
And we
not.
can do the same in a private society anyway.
Right. In the
But
early
you
in
said
the
about
early
what's
days, there were privately built roads called turnpikes,
yeah, yeah,
and they had their own toll systems, and that we did have roads before government, strangely enough.
yeah.
So all right,
I
so that's the boring tunnels, but we're headed towards a world, my opinion, we're headed towards a world where not very far in the future there will be self-driving cars. There will be robo taxis. A lot of people won't bother owning cars. The self-driving cars won't get an
Well, there's a lot
accident.
of people not bothering to own cars now, by the way.
But I'm saying it'll expand dramatically, and the
Sure.
self-driving cars won't commit traffic violations. So, you and I probably feel the same way about this, but we won't need police to pull over cars anymore if the cars are driving
Right.
themselves and they're inherently safe. How do you see
No.
the Florida government handling a transition to a world of self-driving cars?
Okay. First of all, there's a question here of land use or land rights, right? Property rights. So everything from either Fort Lauderdale or in North Miami-Dade County, there all those underground rights are all belong to the state, like the state of Florida, not the local governments. So even if once you cross a body of water, then you have to go to the federal with the Army Corps of Engineers. Uh, but ultimately, so like if you wanted to take that tunnel to the beach in Miami or cross the Las Olas River in Fort Lauderdale, you have to involve the Army Corps of Engineers. Now, I think that that Florida is interested in doing that anyway, because they're not, obviously it's underutilized, and they have huge urban issues in those with congestion in the area. Now, talking about what does it look like for like libertarians whimsically call police officers giving tickets as road pirates, but the reality is that we do have to technology always is transformative into our lives for the better, right? We've discovered that. It's something that's truer rather than not. And in other words, it would be set to transform our relationship with law enforcement, forever in these cases, right? Now, because the justification is just not there anymore. So they wouldn't have to be armed as heavily armed. They wouldn't have to have such heavy patrol routes. They could actually walk. They could take the same transportation. They don't have to stand apart from us in these labeled vehicles and pretend that they are offering us protection when we know after so many school shootings, for instance, that they have no obligation to protect anyone if they so choose. So I look forward to an era where we can look at safety a little different than relying on people who have no liability for protecting us.
Okay, so let's talk about
Yeah,
SpaceX is operating out of Canaveral.
sure.
There's a lot of
The
space
Pocket.
operations happening in Canaveral.
Yep.
And
NASA's not happy.
NASA's happy. NASA loves SpaceX. SpaceX is launching a
Yeah,
lot of their payloads.
yeah, but NASA's trying to create their own rocket program and to do
Yeah,
the same, and they keep failing.
I think a lot of people at NASA have figured out, the people who care about the future of space have figured out that SpaceX is the path to the future, and they, congressmen force them to build SLS.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at the future, one of the other things that I just did a video about this, I don't know if you saw my video about this. Elon announced at the shareholder meeting that I was at, that they're going to be announcing before the end of this year the next factory location. There's a lot of people speculating about where the next factory is going to be. Right now, Ontario and Quebec are very popular guesses. One of my guesses is Kansas. One of my guesses is Osaka. But I've got a dark horse candidate for the next Tesla factory, and I call it Giga Orlando. And my theory, and you won't like all of this theory, my theory is, number one, Orlando is like an hour from SpaceX's operations at Canaveral, so it's very convenient for Elon to have a factory near his SpaceX facilities in Canaveral, because there's a lot of growth happening I don't know if you're aware of this. There's a lot of growth happening at Canaveral for SpaceX. They're building a factory to build starships. They're building a launch platform to launch starships. He has said Canaveral is going to be the main launch point for Starship, which is the big effing rocket that's going to take us to Mars, the moon, and Mars and beyond. So Orlando has a lot of advantages. I'm going to summarize them really quick, but I just want to get your take on this. Number one, obviously no state income tax. What I would describe relative to other states as a business-friendly government, not as friendly as a libertarian government would be, but a relatively business-friendly government. Elon talks about locating factories in places where people want to live. So Austin, Texas is a very popular place for people to live. Berlin, Germany, the two that he was talking about were Austin and Berlin. That Tesla's first big factory, new factory was in Nevada, in Sparks, Nevada, and it's not a place people particularly want to live. The southern tip of Texas, where they're building Starship right now, there's just not as much there. But Orlando has so much. You've got, number one, for recreation, you've got Disney and Universal Studios and all that stuff. Number two, there's a lot of universities around to supply a great labor force. There's so many good things about Orlando. What would you, and I have another point I'll get at in a second, but what would you think about Tesla building a gigafactory in Orlando and producing cars and batteries here?
I think honestly, I think that the legislature should, if they gave a deal to Disney at one point that they're sort of taking backseat, which they're really not. I think you can offer them the same deal. Run this entire. There's plenty of land between Orlando and
Canaveral. Yeah, there's a big chunk of land there. Yeah,
right. Pick a spot, man. Build your own city.
I don't think Tesla needs that much space, and I don't think they need the special privilege of like a zoning district or whatever. But and here's my theory that you won't like. Okay, my theory is that if this happens, and I think this happens around October 23rd, if I'm right, Elon's going to be I believe Elon might be in Orlando or Canaveral October 23rd for this. There's a meeting of Tesla people, and I think he might be coming. My theory is that Elon announces Giga Orlando with Governor DeSantis a few weeks before the election, which probably gives DeSantis a boost going into the election, that he's bringing, tens of thousands of jobs to Florida. in other words, it would be a political. I think Elon likes DeSantis, right? I think he feels like DeSantis has been favorable to some of the things that Elon wants to do, both SpaceX and Boring Company and
Sure.
Tesla. And I think one of the ways that it would be uh, useful is to boost DeSantis before the election, even though DeSantis is probably going to, no offense, I think DeSantis is
Don't
probably going
take
to
it.
beat Charlie Crist, but also to help position DeSantis for the presidential election in 2024, because you've probably noticed that Elon isn't that fond of Joe Biden, and Joe
Well,
Biden isn't that
it's
fond of Elon.
his administration. His administration's gone out of its way to try to make it difficult for Elon personally and for really boring, right? So some I don't know if you're familiar with this, but they've tried to uh, tease out these ideas that they're coming after him over his taxes,
Oh yeah,
repeatedly audits. But in terms of the boring side, they're 100% not regulated, right? Like so, there is a strong push at every corner to try and basically bring him inside the regulatory sphere of government and capture him.
oh yeah.
Like him, his company. Oh, this is basically a monopoly. What do we have to, shaking the cage, man? In other words.
Yeah. It was,
So
I mean,
he's
one of my favorite moments was when Joe Biden made some comment about, wishing Elon well on his trip to on this trip to the moon. It's like he's flying NASA astronauts to the he's actually criticizing Elon for flying NASA astronauts to the moon. And in the middle of all this Ukraine stuff, right?
yeah,
Um, with
like
all this
they're
conflict with
living.
Russia,
They really
SpaceX.
are. He's really on their mind. He really is.
Well, the joke is that Elon lives rent free in a lot of people's heads. but
Mm-hmm.
but
It is.
SpaceX is the reason we're still able to fly astronauts to the space station, right?
Sure.
Without SpaceX, we wouldn't be able to get to the space station.
You have to talk to the Russians for a ride.
Yeah, and when we're not going to get a ride from the Russians now, when we're like basically at war with them. So, all right. So, the other Elon Musk company that I'm curious about your thoughts on is Neuralink. Neuralink
Okay.
is building basically a chip that would be implanted in your brain. What do you think the libertarian perspective is going to be on enhancing your brain with a chip and a chip implant?
Whether it's gene hacking or adding going cyborg, right? These are all this stuff is all already well thought of in the libertarian psyche, right? It's because it's been the stuff of science fiction for 50 years. Just look at Blade
Yeah.
Runner, right? This idea. So it's there are some people who are concerned in regards to the privacy issues involved, in the same way they're concerned about the technological aspects of cryptocurrency and the blockchain, right? So you notice that you've had blockchain being a cryptographic type of technology rising to ascension before we're starting to really see the popularization of all this other technologies is probably going to resolve. These are things that the market gets to resolve, and you can see the different components of it coming together without even government regulation or politicians stepping forward and doing something, right? So I see, it's maybe not something that's necessarily my cup of tea because I'm not one of those first guys to step out and
You're not
be
going
a
to be an
first
early
adopter.
you're not going to be an early adopter for
No,
a brain implant.
right. I may think one day it'd be very cool to fall asleep in a self-driving car, while behind the wheel and I'm not drunk. But there you go. Okay. So, or drinking, that is to say.
All right.
So I think I just like I said, I'm not one of those guys who's gonna risk the technology on a first adopter basis. But yeah,
All
it's
right.
there.
So I got two other things. I'm going to ask you about population collapse, and I'm going to ask you about Twitter. So Elon
Okay.
has talked before, and I pretty much agree with Elon on almost everything. I don't agree with him on universal basic income, but we don't need to go there because I talk about that too much in my videos. But the birth rates are falling globally. Birth rates in a lot of countries, I think including the United States, are below what's called replacement rate. So some countries are starting to see their populations shrink. The United States will probably hit that some point in the future, especially as immigration is apparently declining. And this can create significant problems for society if you have a society that has a social security and Medicare system, and the young people working are paying for the older people. If the percentage of the population that's older grows and the percentage of the population that's working shrinks, it starts to become untenable for those working people to pay for all the old people to have all this stuff. What are your thoughts on population collapse, and in particular, why do you think women are having fewer children?
Ooh. Population collapse first. How about that?
Sure.
Uh, the idea, there's the reason why we even talk about this on for any reason is because people think there's this theory called peak population. I believe if it's in other words, there's a maximum the world can take in terms of population.
Oh yeah,
And
there's this environmental BS that there's some maximum carrying capacity of the planet when
right,
we're like fleas
right,
on
but
an
but
elephant. We're
it's been
fleas.
discussed for more than 100 years, and people actually give this some serious thought, right? Like there's a maximums, right? And we end up finding out there's more, like you can get more and more. Like years ago, they said the maximum was going to be a billion people, and we're well past that now, right? So it changes, but the reality is that there does seem to be, like you said, a a situation where there is some type of leveling off of growth rates, right? Not or the growth of the population rates.
No, it's not just a
Collapse is a
leveling
different.
off. There are countries where the population is already declining. Japan, South Korea. South Korea, what did somebody say? There's 3 times as many 50-year-olds as there are 1-year-olds in South Korea. So you think in 40 years their population is going to go to 1/3 of what it currently is. In 40, maybe not 40 years
Yeah,
immediately, because the people will live longer, but there's going to be a 40-year span where the population is going to be a third. Yeah.
right. So what ends up happening is that's the first, right? So this question about uh, the capacity of the Earth. The next thing is the actual capacity of the Earth in terms of resources that are available to even support that many people, right? But we're supposedly well past that. So it ends up being that people, I'm going to take a number from like the abortion debate. You know that, for example, of people who that 70% of all elective abortions are done because they feel like they don't have the finances to support another child,
I did
right?
not
To
know
raise
that.
another child. Yeah, it's an enormous number. It's more than 70. Actually, it's more than 70%. But that's so it's a you have to, obviously multidisciplinary thinking does help for these kind of thought experiments. So when you realize that really it ends up being access to the economics of the story, it makes you wonder. It makes you realize why Germany pays pays women what it was like $8,000 per child, on a month that to stay home and have the child, in other words, and then give them the birth and then the whole welfare system that they have over there,
And
and
yet,
they don't seem to be having.
and yet Germany still has a declining, still has a low birth rate.
Right, because at the end of the day, it actually ends up being something about culture. Now it's why does that matter? Why does that matter? Is because the reason, but you can't, even though if you want a culture with a lot of with children and a big family and just extended family and everyone's kumbaya. What's the one thing that hurts basically civilization, right? It's really how do civilizations collapse? And it ends up being just stupid politicians constantly getting in the way of people who want to live the life they choose to. Now, on the opposite side, no. So let's put it this way.
I agree that's part
So
of it,
if you
but I don't think that's all of it.
Well, in other words, you have politicians who are actually. So I say that like on a tax basis, right? When you have confiscatory tax policies, right? When you destroy whole economies, in other words, it would take decades to recover. You can and you have on top of that, you have variability in a market. That's all it really means, variability. And it has so much variability or inconsistency that you can't actually plan towards it. The market's not stable enough to plan 5, let alone 10 years ahead, right? For what you want out of life. And on top of that, it also means you cannot build wealth. You cannot save.
Right.
Inflation, for example, is a tax on savings. So you
Well,
can't have
let
that.
me just let
So
me just say this here for people. So I'll say what I think you probably agree with, which is
sure.
people say the problem is financial, and I don't agree with that. I agree with you. The problem is cultural, and then they say, well, if the problem
Right.
is financial, so we need the government to give them more money. And it's like, how about we have a government that takes less money If we stopped dropping bombs all over the world, we stopped having troops all over the world, we stopped having government do all these things that it shouldn't be doing, then government would be spending less money and there'd be more money for the people. And then people would have more financial freedom to be able to do these things. But I'm going to disagree with the idea that it is financial. And I agree that it's cultural, but I think there's a different nature of the cultural problem. And the cultural problem is I think there's cultural decay. And in particular,
Sure.
as we get wealthier, because wealthier people have fewer children, wealthier countries have fewer children. Within a country, the wealthier people have fewer children, the poorer people have more children. Within the world, the wealthier countries have fewer children, the poorer countries have more children. What happens when you get wealthy at a certain point is that wealth gives you freedom. And that freedom means you can do things like travel and go to Disney World or go to Europe or whatever. And having children cuts into that freedom to do all the things you want to do. Not libertarian freedom, right? But children are an obligation. Now, I have two
Opportunity
kids.
cost.
Well, no, but like I have two kids, and yeah, I suppose I sacrificed and I didn't do some things I might have done, but nothing I've done in life has been more meaningful than having children and raising children. And people who
Sure.
don't have children yet don't understand that. And even people who do have children when they're young don't necessarily appreciate it until they're past the point where they can have children. And another side of this is, and I don't know, how old are you?
40.
You're 40. So I'm slightly older than you, as in 16 years older. So when I was a kid, and this may have still been true when you were a kid, there was a consistent message across our culture from your family, from your religion, from television, from radio, we actually listened to the radio when I was a kid, from movies, from school, from every aspect of from what you read. There was this consistent message that one of the fundamental things you will do in life is you will get married and you will have children. And that message is gone. That message died out somewhere in the last 20 or 30 years. And it's not just the United States. I think that message has vanished in a lot of the world for whatever reason. And people don't recognize that all of us got here because our ancestors had kids. Every species that is existing on the planet today exists because their ancestors had kids. It is one of the most fundamental things you will do in life is you will have children and raise children. And we've lost it. And that, I think, is the fundamental collapse of humanity. And my take on population collapse, this is an extinction event. If the birth rate drops below 2 and you just go out enough generations, then we go extinct. You have to have the birth rate be above 2 in order to not go extinct. And
Sure.
and it's almost to the point where I say, how, like, even as a libertarian, I'm not suggesting we go Handmaid's Tale and force women to have children, but if there was a non-libertarian solution to the problem and it kept humanity in existence versus the libertarian approach leading to humanity going extinct, I might say, I might be willing to give up on libertarianism a little bit because I don't want humanity to go extinct. What are your thoughts on that? I'm sorry, I rambled more than I should.
No, that's fair enough. So there's two ways of thinking about it. The first thing that comes to mind is mutual aid societies. Right? If the issue is well, two things. Now, I think two things that go hand in hand, not isolated, is culture and finances, and when I mean finances, I mean resources. Resources not also non-financial. I mean that means experience. That means psychological support, not just financial support. It means the extended family, not simply nuclear family, right? Uh, it means that where people communities are valuing not monetary wealth, but they reflect what you say, right? That children are a sign of wealth in a society, and by the way, but axiomatically that means that the declining birth rates are a clear sign of the impoverishment of society, right? So not just the moral decay, not just moral decay, but certainly financial decay. They ultimately go hand in hand, and compromising of values and politics go equally in hand. So and some of that has to do with consumerism and materialism, and things that place value not on the person, but on insubstantial objects, raised into an inappropriate level of want, right? What does that actually get you, right? What does the time investment get you? So ultimately, so let's go back to what I was saying about mutual aid societies. So when government was small in the United States, all services from immigration to healthcare to schooling even were handled through a mutual process of mutual aid. Organizations would set up, oftentimes aligned along either charitable organizations or religious institutions to provide services. I am not necessarily saying that we have to go back all the way to that, but I am saying that we've
I am.
always had well, I'm just saying we don't have to mimic it 100% because we have technology here that replaces some of the organization of that at hand. It is useful though to have people who care lead the mission though, and that really is a huge part of it because politicians don't care whatsoever, right? And they don't care about saving money, and they don't care about money actually getting to the right place, right? Or for that
No,
fundamental
honestly, they care about money getting to the wrong place.
right. In fact, that's what's their preference, right? They want to
Yeah.
continue this problem. And what is the closest thing to immortality on planet Earth is a government program? Yes, I just made a Ronald Reagan quote.
Well, no, that's
Yeah,
funny because one of my jokes, this is not a Florida thing, but there used to be this program called Voice of America, whose
sure.
purpose was to spread the word of democracy to Eastern Europe and Russia by sending radio waves into those countries. Well, not that many people listen to radio anymore, and there's lots of ways to get that message into those countries now without Voice of America, and yet Voice of America still costs like $100 million a year. Like, how is that? Did anybody ever figure out, hey, we don't need that anymore?
Well, government as exists today is a vestigial, right, of a society in the past that was on a war footing, really. In honesty, it was on a war footing. It saw dangers everywhere in the world, and it had all these programs invented to solve these problems. It always comes down to safety, right? You want your safety, you have to give up your liberty, right? So that means you have to pay more taxes, really, at the end of the day, what that really means. But again, I just want to get back to this idea of societal collapse, really civilizational collapse. It really this is it, values really do matter, right? So it's not the difference between a birth rate and a Kurt Vonnegut novel, right? That says Fahrenheit, right? For instance, where what do you value in society is important. Is it really having that froyo, or is it really hanging out with loved ones?
Oh, now I
You
want
know,
to throw you, but
uh,
thank you. Go ahead.
no, I'm thinking about one actually. That's why I said it. Yeah, just it's cool in the time. Anyway, but that's we can get there. You do need people to actually lead by example. So we do when we say who should be the ones that naturally lead among us, they're people that should reflect the character that we want to live by, right? It's just very simple, right? So we don't have that in society. And frankly, the people that we do elevate to often to serve as those kind of role models are people that really are not being told. We're not being told the truth about their background realistically, right? Or they try to hide it, like Joe Biden. You know, the man of his times, the man of who was friends to Jim Crow and to
I
and
would
to
say I
busing
would
and
I would say Joe
whatnot.
Biden is the man of La Mancha, but so let me turn to one last topic. Um, Elon Musk is maybe buying Twitter, and there's this litigation going on, and this is where, like, I used to think there was no difference between the Republican and Democratic parties, and I do think the difference between Republican and Democratic parties is small, but I think the Democratic Party has gotten a little bit crazier lately. So when Elon decided he was buying Twitter, the Democrats were all upset that he was buying Twitter, and they say no, he can't buy Twitter. And then when he decided he didn't think he wanted to buy Twitter, all of a sudden the Democrats were like, no, he has to buy Twitter. And I'm sure once he gets control of Twitter, they're going to say he shouldn't own Twitter. What are your thoughts on Elon buying Twitter? Whether it's a good thing for society that Twitter becomes a free speech platform. What are your thoughts on all that?
I think Twitter's because people are talking about Twitter because there's a lot of engagement there. It's become this. What are these social media companies calling themselves? They're calling themselves the new public square, right?
Oh, where
So,
where do people find you on Twitter? What's your Twitter handle?
Roos for Florida, Roos for Florida, just FOR Florida, Roos for Florida.
Okay, so I'll put a link to that in the description below, by the way.
Okay, so yeah, I think you should buy it. Honestly, I think it's what he said, right? The people are paying attention to that he's part of this class of people who knows how to who basically move capital and it's more efficiently, right? So I think it'd be good for stockholders. That's why people were interested. I think it'd be good for I think it'd be good for society because he knows that he can present a more efficient and a useful product for society. And ultimately, entrepreneurs are not blood-sucking vampires like politicians. They actually their desire is to find efficiencies and that provide a service to the public. Otherwise, there's no value in what they're doing, and you can't make a profit of something that somebody's not going to enjoy the product and purchase it at a profit. In other words.
All right. So thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. And for those who are watching now, we had another conversation. This video is on the YouTube platform. We had another conversation that's on the Locals platform, my channel, The Daily Lie, which is warrenredlick.locals.com. Please check that out. There'll be a link in the description below. Hector, I want to thank you for coming on the channel. And I want to just say to the audience, please check out my other videos. Please support me on the Locals platform, on Patreon, as a YouTube channel member. Please check out the t-shirts at elonbits.com. And please like, share, and subscribe this video. Please like and share this video, and please subscribe to the channel. Thanks, everyone, for watching. I'll see you soon.